Hey guys, and welcome to my Camille guide. Today we're going to be going over the runes as well as the build and skill order. I'm also going to be talking about the laning phase on how to play out the lane, as well as the mid to the late game, as well as team fighting, tips, and we're going over the most important thing, which is the combos for Camille. Before we start today's video though, I do have a little quick announcement about my stream. If you're new to the stream or you're new to the YouTube channel, don't forget to check out my stream, guys, because I'm nearly streaming almost every single day right now, and I'm basically grinding out challenging games almost every single day. If you're trying to get better at League or you have questions in general, don't forget to join my stream, guys. There's a lot to learn from my stream, so there will be a link in the description below. Don't forget to check that out, guys. And with that being said, let's get over to the Camille guide. Typically, the best runes for Camille right now is always starting in the precision tree. You always want to go into this tree. You want to take Conqueror in pretty much every single game. It's pretty much like the best keystone for Camille at the moment. You could also go for Press the Attack, that's what some Camille players do, but mainly Conqueror is actually one of the best runes to go for. You always want to take Triumph, as this is pretty much core. Now here's where things get really interesting. You could go for Alacrity, because this is very important because it gives attack speed. It generally helps you out when trying to 1v1 or when trying to split push. But what most Camille players do is either going for Tenacity or going for Bloodline. Now Tenacity is actually really good because if you're against a team comp with a lot of CC, then Tenacity is probably the best choice. Now if they don't really have that much CC, you want to go for Bloodline, because Bloodline gives you a lot of sustain, and if you don't need Tenacity, then you can just go for Bloodline. If you think that you need more attack speed, you could go Alacrity, but personally, I would recommend going for Bloodline all the time. Now for these three, I would always recommend Last Stand because it's always better. Now, this is where things get really interesting. You can go into the Resolve tree, or you can go into the Inspiration tree. Now obviously, for the best laning phase, I would recommend going to Resolve Tree, taking the Shield Bash with either the Second Wind or Bone Plating. Now Second Wind is the best rune to go for if you're in a matchup where they're poking a lot. If they have a lot of poke, you go Second Wind. If they don't have that much poke in the laning phase, your opponent I mean, you want to be going for Bone Plating instead. This is pretty much going to, like, if you're going Bone Plating, it's going to tank up most of the damage as long as they don't poke out your Bone Plating. So if they go for the all-in, Bone Plating is going to tank up a lot of damage. If you think that you don't need these two runes, you think that you could go for like a more scaling runes, what I would recommend instead is going to the Inspiration tree, taking the free boots with the Biscuit Delivery. This is pretty much the best setup to go for if you want to have the scaling setup. Now as for the bonus stats, I would always recommend going for attack speed. I would always recommend going 1 AD and 1 armor or magic resist, depends on what you're playing against, but this is mainly the options that you have inside the runes. Building items on Camille is actually one of the most interesting things about Camille, because technically you're always building the same items over and over again in every single game, except the way how you build them, like the build order, is always different. So moving on to the starter items, if you're in a matchup where you're going to be poked quite a lot, I would recommend going for a Doran Shield. If you think that you're not going to be poked down by your opponent that much, you could also start off with a Doran Blade. Doran Blade is perfect for that. If you think that you're in a very easy matchup, or you think that you need a lot of sustain throughout the pre-level 3, like the first couple levels, you could also go for a Longsword into 3 potions. Now, most important thing, if you think that you're in a really easy matchup, you could even go for Longsword with Available Potion. Now for the full build, this is pretty much what the full build will always be. The Trinity Force basically maximizes your damage. The boots completely depends on what you're playing against in the enemy team. If they have a lot of AD, you want to be going for Ninja Tabis. If they have a lot of AP or they have a lot of CC, you want to be going for Mercs instead. Hydra is pretty much the core build, core item that you want to be going for as the second item, always, all the time. That stance is pretty much a broken item on Camille at the moment. You always want to get this. Starrick's Cage is also a core item. It's just so good on Camille, you don't want to be missing out on this. And then you have the Guardian's Angel. Now, you also have some situational items. You have the Deadsman's Plating. Technically, you built this instead of the Guardian's Angel if you think that you don't need it and you think you need more movement speed through chasing people. Thornmill is really good if they have a lot of AD and they're basically full AD. It could be really useful. And if they have like a lot of AP, you could also go for a Hex Shrinker. Then again, you don't necessarily need this. Ultimately, this is like the full build that you want to be going for every game. You just want to be swapping the boots sometimes. Now, most importantly about Camille, the first item that you buy, it really depends on what matchup you're up against. If you think that you need a lot of, if you think that you're going to have to push a lot, and you think that you just have to pressure, go for TMM. If you want to maximize your damage in the early game, in the pre-6, or beyond that, go for the Sheen as the first item, because technically the Sheen is the strongest item for Camille currently to rush in the game. The skill order for Camille is also pretty easy to understand. If you're playing against a melee matchup, you want to be maxing out your Q first, then your E, and then your W. If you're playing against a ranged matchup, you want to have really short cooldowns on your E, so you want to start maxing your E first, then Q, and then W. The laning phase is one of the most important things about Camille, because if you fail to do the laning phase properly, you're going to fall behind for the rest of the game. Where if you win the laning phase, you can actually get to snowball like literally 1v5 for the rest of the game. Generally, what I focus on the most throughout the early game with Camille is to try to get the push, try to get the pressure so that you can roam together with your own jungler, perhaps maybe outnumber the enemy jungler by fighting them 2v1, or maybe getting the river camp, or maybe even getting the herald camp. But so long as you like focus on getting the push and the pressure rather than getting the kills, you can carry games very hard. You could even use the push and pressure to even go mid lane, perhaps get a few kills in mid lane, perhaps even get a few platings in the mid lane tower as well. But generally, don't focus as much on getting the kills, but rather focus on maintaining or getting the push or the pressure in lane so that you can use that to snowball on different lanes. Especially Camille is very useful for that because she has her E, which is basically like an insane jump to get very close to people, and you also have your ultimate which you can lock people with, so make sure you use that to your advantage. Now obviously there are matchups which are very hard to play for Camille, as she has an insanely weak early game in, you know, most matchups. Generally, what you can also focus on the most, if you have to play very safe, you could try to focus on setting up your lane for ganks. Now, this is what a lot of people forget. If you have a really hard laning phase, you could also focus on just setting up your lane for ganks and also get many kills that way, because once again, Camille has the perfect ultimate for this. So make sure you use this to your advantage. But generally, in the early game, you just want to focus on trying to scale up to the mid-late game, because that's where Camille is the strongest after all. She's one of the best mid-late game champions in the game, and her early game is simply not that great. But, you know, with that being said, that's pretty much what you want to focus on in the early game. The mid-late game is where things get really interesting, because this is where Camille is at her strongest. Technically, she is the strongest mid-late game champion of almost the entire game. Typically, the way how you want to play Camille is very simple. You either want to split push as hard as you can, trying to get the pressure on the side lanes and getting people towards you so that your team can carry the rest of the game. But you also have the second option, which is to try and get catches throughout the game. Camille's actually really good at getting catches overall throughout the game, because once again, she gets a lot of damage eventually, and her E and ultimate allows you to get a lot of picks. Typically, you want to be split pushing when your TP is up, when the enemy teleport is down. Now, Of course, you don't necessarily have to split push when your TP is up. If you see like a really good team fight, you could just TP over there, or you could just walk over there. But the most important thing about top lane to know is that you want to outnumber the enemy team. So if you could force the enemy top laner to stay on a different lane while you can teleport to a team fight, you could turn it into like a 5 against 4 and then carry very hard. This is the most important thing, not only just about Camille, but top lane in general. Now, there's lots of ways to teamfight with Camille, but specifically the most 3 important things about Camille and teamfights are 3 things, such as defending your AD carry, defending your AP carry, and using your tools to kill the enemy AD carry or AP carry. Basically, in short, if you cannot reach out to the enemy backline to kill their AD carry or AP carry, your best bet, your best option is to basically defend your own carries, because after all, like, they're doing like most of the damage as well. Camille actually has really amazing tools to help out your AD carry, AP carry too, so you want to be using that to your advantage. So if you don't get your chance to kill the enemy backline, just try to defend your teammates AD carry and AP carry instead. They are a big part of winning the team fights, and you want to ensure that they can stay alive throughout those fights. They will be the carry of the team if you cannot get into their backline, basically. So you want to be focusing on that the most. Now, one of my most important tips, or rather most important advice for Camille, is to play the early game properly. Make sure that you don't fall behind in the early game, because if you mess up the early game, it's over. Camille has one of the most expensive items in the game. If you don't get to build those items fast enough, she's going to lack a lot of damage. So even if you're in a really bad matchup and you think that you might actually probably die a couple of times, make sure that you try to prevent that from happening. It's okay to be behind of about 10 or 20 CS if that is what it means to play the mid late game properly. If you're going to mess up early game, your mid lane game is over. It's done and there's no coming back. Now, for the final stage of this video, we're going to go over the combos for Camille. I would suggest trying to go over like all of them, as all of them are going to be very good in many different situations. This clip basically contains all the combos currently existing for Camille. So with that being said, enjoy the combos.